Welcome back to the Charter Podcast, brought to you by St. Xavier University. I'm 𝗦cie𝗰𝗶𝗟, back with the gang, reunited, and it feels so good. 𝗏𝗏 Clay Harbor did a phenomenal job covering the Senior Bowl. Let's start there, guys. Just real quick from both of you, I want to hear, what was your favorite part of the week?
I mean, my favorite part is the guys who you didn't even know their names, who pop, and you're like, David Walker, Central Arkansas? This guy's making plays. Carson Vincent, Alabama A&M, Clay Webb. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on. It's the guys who you have no idea who they are, who make an impression, and that's really cool.
I'm a little bit biased because I was a small school guy, and I went to the East-West Shrine game, not the Senior Bowl, but I love the small school guys that come out there and nobody's really expecting much of them. Obviously, Gray Zabel, the North Dakota State product, is a guy that's probably got more pub than anybody. And just watching those guys play themselves into an opportunity to live their dream coming from a small school. And you don't see it a lot these days because the way college football is set up with all the NIL stuff, and these guys can transfer here and there after having some success. But small school guys, undersized guys, the lesser known guys coming in and showing they can play with the big boys. The guy that has LSU or Florida in their helmet, and there was plenty of those. Go back and watch or listen to the last couple of podcasts me and Alex had. We got so many names for you guys that we think are draftable for our Chicago Bears.
Love it. Little plug there, shameless plug. Let's get into it, guys, because a lot has happened since the three of us were together. This Bears coaching staff is taking form here. And obviously the big one over the weekend, sort of bombshell news, was the Eric Bieniemy hire, who is going to be the Bears running backs coach. That's a huge name. That's someone that was in the mix for head coaching jobs not too long ago, was an offensive coordinator. He was a play caller. He worked in Kansas City, Patrick Mahomes, Washington, all of it, and then spent a year in college, got out of college, hoping to get back in the NFL, lands as a running backs coach, where some wanted him as maybe an offensive coordinator, if not a head coach here in Chicago. So I want to get your thoughts, Clay. We'll start with you this time. What was your reaction to the Bieniemy news?
It's also surprising because I didn't follow his career arc after he left Kansas City, and he was a guy that was so highly touted in Kansas City. You know, he won 2 Super Bowls. He had the 3rd highest scoring offense in NFL history at one point. He was a guy that was getting head coaching interviews. I think he got like 17 head coaching interviews, but could never break into the head coaching position. So just to hear that he's a running back coach now, and I know he played running back in the NFL for about 10 years, and it was a 2nd-round draft pick, bounced around a bunch of different teams. But I was surprised. First thing I thought was surprised that he's actually available to be a running back coach. But then you start doing your research on him. He was the offensive coordinator at Washington 2 years ago, not obviously this last year. And he had Sam Howell. He didn't have a great quarterback. I think he was ranked number 21 in offense. But I think taking a step back after spending a year at UCLA in college and just being a running back coach, the position he played in the NFL, where he really made his mark in this league, is a good hire. And that's obviously if he's not going to step on toes, and they've had those interviews with him, I'm sure, and they're confident that he's going to know his role and his place in the organization. And he is an expert at running back. He played for 10 years. He coached there for 7 years in Kansas City with Andy Reid. He coached Adrian Peterson in Minnesota in one of his MVP caliber years. So this guy, no matter what you say about him, you hear he's a guy that does require a certain level of accountability. Some players love him, some players hate him. Look at Patrick Mahomes, talks about this guy glowingly. Greatest player in NFL history. So I think it's a good hire. He's an expert at the running back position. I know he's a highly touted name, and there is a little bit of, maybe this guy isn't the best coach, but I think it's a good hire.
Yeah, these 2 hires, and I'll focus on this one, follow 2 trends. So the Bieniemy trend is a coach who has played the game before. We've seen that, right, with the Al Harris, with the Antoine Randall L. Like, we've seen, getting guys at position coaches who have played that position. And as you said, played 9 years, 142 games in the NFL. So he knows what it takes to play at this level and to have a long career at this level. You mentioned Adrian Peterson. He's also coached a lot of other great players. Maurice Jones-Drew was his guy at UCLA. So that's not like taking on an established player and, just kind of working with him. No, like he worked with Maurice Jones-Drew in college, Jamal Charles with the Chiefs, Kareem Hunt also very early in his career with the Chiefs. You mentioned the level of accountability. And these are things that, I've questions about and I'm interested in learning about. You mentioned the career arc, right? This is a guy who you said double-digit head coach interviews 1 year. Then he ends up an OC for the Commanders. And then he's the OC at UCLA. And now he's a position coach. So it seems like he's kind of going the wrong, I'm just curious about that. I'm curious about that. And it's hard to, I don't know. There's no way around it.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that. Ahead. And then, when you read about him, there are reports that he's a really intense guy. Like Ron Rivera, I think we would say is an intense head coach, right? But there are reports from the Washington Post that players were complaining to Ron Rivera that Bieniemy was like too intense. So if in Ron Rivera's staff, this guy was too intense, it's like, okay, where's the accountability? Where's the intensity? What have you learned about that? And then there are similar reports from the Denver Post about his time in Colorado. So it's a very interesting hire. I'm looking forward to learning more about him, talking with him more. And then obviously, Andy Reid is the greatest offensive coach in the NFL. And he worked with him a long time. So I'm really intrigued by him in his position. Like this is the position he does.
I heard from someone who worked in Kansas City with Bieniemy. He is the greatest leader I've ever been around. Someone who's been in Kansas City a long time. So I found that really interesting. And, everyone's saying, well, this is a guy that maybe had too much accountability. Guess what, Chicago Bears? You can't have it both ways. Okay? Don't tell me last year that you want more accountability and you want to be coached hard and then start complaining about someone coming in who is too hard of a coach, right? Like, so maybe this is, the reaction from management. Like, we heard you. You guys said you want to be coached hard. Here we go.
Not this hard. You said we want to be coached hard. That's right, Ruthie. It's like
it's too much. Yeah.
With these hires, you're starting to see that they are setting that culture of accountability. And that's something they talked about.
And I think from maybe Ryan Poles, Kevin Warren, they said, all right, our guys said they want to be coached hard. Here we go. Get ready. Buckle up. Like we're going to go from one end of the spectrum to the other. So I find that interesting. I think it's a great hire. It's someone with a lot of experience, someone who can also be another, I keep using this phrase sounding board for Ben Johnson, who's, don't forget guys, like I know he's making $13 million a year, but he's a first-time head coach. This guy has never been a head coach before. So to have people with a lot of experience on his staff, I think is so wise. It shows a lot of humility, I think, from Ben Johnson to feel like he's not going to be intimidated or threatened by anyone on his staff. And I'm looking forward to seeing kind of how that Bieniemy role shapes itself. And, how does DeAndre Swift feel about Eric Bieniemy? And what other players is Eric Bieniemy going to attract to Chicago or, maybe shy away from? So it'll be really interesting because I think that running back room is going to be one that we'll talk about this offseason quite a bit. So, I'm fascinated. There are a lot of hires that I think are so interesting on this staff. And I don't always feel like that's the case for a first year head coach. I've heard this phrase, your first staff is never your best staff. Well, this is pretty impressive what Ben Johnson has put together so far. So I'm looking forward to, hearing the players' reactions to some of the names, the big names that Ben Johnson was able to get here. Let's move on because some of the news of the day, Dan Roushar, I believe that is David Haw was correcting. He heard a correction. That's the pronunciation. I know there's been sort of some back and forth. Dan Roushar, I think, is the correct way of saying this. He is going to be the Bears offensive line coach. That was a big one. I think a lot of people were waiting to hear. Let's get sort of your reactions. Alex, go ahead.
Well, he continues the other trend of the Saints parade. Just if you coach for the New Orleans Saints with, Dennis Allen and Dan Campbell and Aaron Glenn, you got a pretty good chance of landing on the staff. And that's the case with Dan Roushar, as Ruthie corrected off the top. Nearly 40 years of coaching experience, including 10 in the NFL, largely as position coach. And he was the offensive line coach for the Saints for a handful of years, and those players had a lot of success. So I'm just going to list off. These are the Pro Bowlers that Roushar coached: Max Unger, Andrus Peat, Taron Armstead, and Larry Warford. And then 2 All-Pros as well, Ryan Ramczyk and Armstead as well, 1 All-Pros. And like some of these guys won multiple Pro Bowls, multiple All-Pros. So his units in the Saints, and that was the bulk of his like NFL offensive line coaching career. Those were extremely good units.
Teron Armstead is one of my favorite players I've covered, by the way, because he came to Miami after New Orleans. Just one of the all-time greatest humans, as well as a phenomenal player. Would be a good person for me to reach out to. Thanks for that reminder. Go ahead, Clay.
Yeah, Teron Armstead, honestly, a great player. So when I was with the Saints, we had Teron Armstead, we had Ramczyk, and then we had Pete as well. And our offensive line coach was none other than Dan. And how do we say the last name? Roushar? I should remember that. Roushar. And yeah, just an intelligent guy. And obviously Dan Campbell's our tight end coach. And I just remember sitting in meetings, and sometimes you go to joint meetings, sometimes you have your separate meetings, and then sometimes you go through drills with these guys. And just a smart guy. Ryan Ramczyk was a rookie, and I remember them wearing this dude out, man, just putting him through the ringer. But it was all for a good ending because he became a really good player as a rookie. They developed him quickly, and he was our first-round pick. There was big high hopes for this guy, and he's not a guy that flopped. And I think a lot of that had to do with Roushar because he is such a respected guy you learn from. He knows how to teach technique. He's a guy that you listen to. I don't want to say he's overly like barking at you, like aggressive style coach, but he's going to let you know if you mess up. He's a guy that's for sure going to let you know. You don't really need that guy when you had Sean Payton as your head coach either, because Sean was going to be the first to let you know. And then it comes down to the offensive coordinator, then the offensive line coach. It was always like, I don't know if you guys ever seen Office Space when the guy messed up the heading on the TPS reports. I always refer to the NFL like that, man, because you're going to hear from the head coach, then the offensive coordinator, then here comes the offensive line coach, and here comes the tight end coach. I'm not sure you remember the TPS reports. I know there's a new heading on the TPS reports. But anyways, I'm getting a little off topic here. I think Roushar's a great hire. He's been in the league for years. He's adaptable. He's played and coached in different style offense. Obviously, 8 years with Dennis Allen. He's comfortable with him. He had 5 years with Dan Campbell. So, he's a guy that has been vetted through the Ben Johnson system and the guys that Ben knows, and asked if he could trust this guy, what kind of coach he is. And I can tell you, he's a good coach. I've had some good offensive line coaches. I've had some bad offensive line coaches, and I'll say that he was one of the better offensive line coaches. I'll put him just below Howard Mudd, the legend himself in Philadelphia. But great guy, great coach, and accountability. Like we said, Ruthie, it seems like a lot of these hires are coaches that do require their players to be accountable with everything they do.
Love it. Any follow-up thoughts there, Alex?
Nah. If
you feel like
he has the Clay Harbor stamp of approval, you wouldn't.
I know, right?
And he makes sure that he's not just coaching offensive linemen. Like, he's coaching up the running backs. He's coaching up the tight ends. Like, if he sees us do something, he's going to come up to like a tight end. When I say us, I'm just talking about tight ends. I still consider myself a tight end, even though
hey man, you're a tight end forever. You should.
But he'll coach them together as a full unit and does a good job with that. Even receivers, making sure that they're blocking downfield and getting the things done, make sure they're there.
That's so cool. I was kind of picking up on that as you were explaining him, because it felt like you had some direct experiences with him. And I don't know if everyone always realizes, like, sometimes the running backs coach and the offensive line coach, like, they're coaching the other side, because it's important to make sure you're all kind of seeing it the same way. So love that. Mm-hmm. That's awesome. moving right along here, guys. The big ESPN story today from Courtney Cronin of ESPN. There was a nugget in there that I actually highlighted and screenshotted, and then Alex said we should talk about it in the pod, that Ryan Poles is allegedly or reportedly under contract through 2026. I think a lot of times when we were talking about the hiring cycle, there was an assumption that Ryan Poles was only under contract for next season. It's actually through 2026. And then the expectation is that he will get extended to align with Ben Johnson, assuming all goes well. Your reaction to that, 𝗟𝗟𝗶𝗹?
Not entirely surprising, especially when you hear, Ben Johnson be like, yeah, we're all on the same page and everything looks good. And, my representation had questions about the organization and who reports to whom, and it all checks out. We're all hunky dory. So when I hear that, it's like, okay, they're probably in lockstep. So not the most surprising thing in the world, and that's how it should be, because you don't want to continue the cycle of, okay, the guys being on different schedules. Caleb Williams is on a little bit of a different schedule, right? He had a different head coach, but at least Ryan Poles drafted him. And you would imagine that Ben Johnson would be interested no matter what in Caleb Williams. But if you then have, the quarterback and the head coach and then potentially a new GM all on different schedules and nobody was really involved with the selection process of anybody else, that's when things get wonky. So you want to get that all aligned. You want to get the GM and the head coach and the QB all on that same window. And it seems like the expectation is now that will happen.
I mean, I understand why you do it, right? Because you don't want a GM in his last year or his last 2 years of a system of his contract when he's trying to win now and he's not thinking about building through the future and the holistic view of the organization for the future. But then I start to look and ask myself, what has Ryan Poles done to deserve an extension? And there's a lot of reasons he doesn't deserve an extension. I'm having hard times trying to figure out why he does. And the only reason I can really find that he does deserve an extension is if Ben Johnson wants him to have an extension. And if Ben Johnson, getting the prize coach that we all think he is, this offensive mind that has led the league in offense all these years, has turned down opportunities to become a head coach, to come to Chicago, which is great. If he wants Ryan Poles, then that's the route you got to go for. I just don't know what I've seen from Ryan Poles from the draft or free agency or anything else that say to me that this is a great GM and we got to lock him up and extend him for several more years. So I would still like to see more from him. But if there was a situation to where Ben Johnson's like, hey, I want to be on the same trajectory as my GM, I want me and this guy to be in lockstep, was the term used, conjoined at the hip. We're seeing things the same way. And he spoke glowingly about Ryan Poles. But if you're just not that good at your job, you're just not that good at your job. And from what I've seen so far from Ryan Poles, big Ryan Poles fan. I mean, I love the fact that he's, comes from the Andy Reid tree. He's an inspiration for people of color as a GM, but the guy just hasn't done a great job. And that's why I don't think he should be extended unless Ben Johnson wants him. So that's the only thing I could think of.
Panthers trade's pretty good.
Question mark.
Panthers trade's pretty good.
And the quarterback, we got to make sure, let's see, let's wait, because I think the biggest decision that Ryan Poles has made, because you could make the argument that the Panthers trade and landing Caleb Williams, there was a lot of luck involved, right? The biggest question mark, and when the verdict is still out about Ryan Poles, is Ben Johnson the guy? Because is that the right hire? And I know everyone's all excited about Ben Johnson getting the job, but he's never been out of coach before. There have been so many people that have been coordinators and amazing coordinators and get that coaching job and can't handle it. So if this works out, if there's progress for Caleb Williams this year with this coaching staff and the pieces that they've put together here, then Ryan Poles has earned it. And, you can talk about all the bad things that have happened all you want, but there have been every move Ryan Poles has made hasn't been a bad one. I think the spotlight shifted to Ryan Poles when things went so haywire after Matt Eberflus got fired, and everyone's like, well, wait a second, this roster's not that good. Well, let's see. Let's see what it looks like with some good coaching and a new staff and Ben Johnson, and see if they can kind of turn this thing around. And if so, then heck, if Ryan Poles wants an extension, he deserves it. So I think that's really the biggest question mark. And now you don't have to make that decision in this moment if he's under contract through 2026, right? Like, you'll get to see how it looks, at least from a very broad standpoint. You'll get to see how it looks in 2025. So still plenty of room to grow.
He's kind of married. Yeah, he's kind of married to Ben Johnson. You gave him the opportunity. Yeah. You can go back and say, hey, he's the guy that was in the meetings for the offensive coordinators last year, Shane Waldron, the final say in Flus, a lot of these offensive line moves that didn't work out, Chase Claypool, Velus Jones, but still, hey, if he lands Ben Johnson and Ben Johnson has success, then he's kind of married with him now at this point. So it's them together in lockstep, and I'm pulling for them. But just looking back at the roster construction, some of the trades they made, even looking back, not a big fan of the Montez Sweat deal that's been highly touted, and I'm starting to see that doesn't look as good as it once did. And I'm just looking back at his resume, and his resume to me right now looks it's lacking a lot of success. But if Ben Johnson does well and turns him into a contender, then all is for naught, and bear down, baby.
Bear down. Da Bears. Okay, real quick, guys. What would you give up to go get Myles Garrett?
Whatever it takes. This guy's like one of the best players in the league.
Come on, realistically.
2 1s, one of the 2s this year, a 2 next. I mean, like, honestly, Myles Garrett is that good of a player. I don't care that he's 29 and the Bears traded for Khalil Mack when he was 27. Game changer, crazy good defensive line. I mean, your pass rush just goes to the next level. And talent like that is hard to find. The Bears have the draft capital. They have the cap space. I mean, like, do they need to address the offensive line? Yes. And would a move like this, like, potentially hamper you from signing more free agents to address that? Yes. And are we avoiding a big problem? I am recognizing all of that. Myles Garrett's so good, though. He's so good at football. I mean, like, how many times has he been an All-Pro, Defensive Player of the Year? 10+ sacks in 7 straight seasons, I think. He's crazy good.
Let's not forget who the head coach of the Chicago Bears is. Ben Johnson wants an O-line, and he wants a really good O-line. And you need a lot of resources to build that right now. And I think that's sort of, I'm not saying you shouldn't try and go get Myles Garrett. I'm saying that I'm just thinking from a Bears perspective of the priorities of the head coach, who it sounds like has a lot of say in the front office. That ties into our last conversation about Ryan Poles. I just think he's going to say, we need to make sure that we are investing draft capital, salary cap, all the things in building an offensive line, because right now you arguably need 4 starting offensive linemen. Like, that's a lot. So I think we should pump the brakes.
You just said if it's me, what I give up? I give up.
I know. I did. But listen, that's all I'm saying. That's really where I'm coming from, is from like sort of what would the Bears give up realistically?
100%.
What should they give up realistically to go get Myles Garrett? That to me is going to take a lot. It's going to be interesting. Like, there's no guarantee he gets traded, right? Like, kind of as we see the dominoes fall. Clay, what are your thoughts?
I mean, first off, when's the last time the Bears made the playoffs?
2020.
What's to tell? He wants to go to a contender. What's to say that he wants to go to the Chicago Bears, who haven't shown that they are a contender in several years? But if Myles Garrett was open to Chicago, I mean, it's tough for me to say go get Myles Garrett. I know how much of a game changer he is and how much he could change that defensive line, but it's going to take 2 1s and probably a 2 or a 3 to get this guy. And you have so many holes you need to fill in this roster, Alex. I understand what you're saying. It immediately changes your defense, but I mean, you have a lot of work to put in. You finally got some good draft capital. Ben Johnson's going to have some input to get the players that he wants, that get a chance to get several players that he thinks can fit into his system. Dennis Allen, give them an opportunity to go out there and scout and find some free agents and some rookies and guys that can fit into their system. Because they've had success places. Dennis Allen's great success on defense. Ben Johnson's had great success on offense. So I know what you're saying. He's a game changer. There's not a lot of guys out there. He might be the best defensive player in the league. Him, TJ Watt, Bosa, like who we talking about? He's one of the top defensive players in the league. So, yeah, maybe if the price is right, I don't think it's going to be right just because of how far you need to come and how many different players you need. So I would say, I'm sorry, Myles Garrett. I'm going to pass on this one, but you are one of the best defensive players in the NFL right now.
All right. Guys, I'm sorry to do this to you, but I have to go to the Big Pro Football Show. Clay Harbor, you'll be back on set with us tomorrow, please.
Yes, ma'am.
It's been too long, my friend. And 𝗚liche 𝗰𝗶𝗹, great to see you. Great stuff, guys, from the Senior Bowl. Just like really good content. I know that's going to pay off, and just really happy you guys had the opportunity to do that. So great stuff. And we'll be back here with another episode later this week. Appreciate you both. Thanks for listening to the Charter Podcast, brought to you by St. Xavier University. We'll see you soon.